So let's potentially start, and I will do the presentation this morning together with Dr. Jan Fährmann. My colleague Sabrina Schönrock, who's also part of the Fake ID project, is unfortunately not able to join us this morning. Yeah, we decided to focus on one specific aspect, as was already mentioned earlier. In the Fake ID project, we are dealing with all ethics, legal, and data protection issues, and also the interconnections between these different legal and society related and ethical issues. And yeah, one important issue that indeed links the legal and the ethical side is transparency. And this morning we would like to focus on the transparency aspects. Why? Because we think that, so now you should see, hopefully, this the next slide. Is this okay? If not, because sometimes if it does not move, just let us know. So from our research perspective, transparency is part of accountability, and we have been dealing with that in a number of different research projects already, myself and also some of my colleagues in our research institutes, the Berlin Institute for Safety and Security Research, FEBS Berlin. We have been focusing on transparency aspects in the development of security technology, and we see a number of different aspects. So accountability at the stage of the development of new security technologies. This is also, of course, something that we will have to do in the Fake ID project with the Fake ID detector. So what we need is risk assessment, data protection impact assessment, and this is very much normatively related to privacy and fundamental rights in a broader sense. But then the second aspect, and of course, if we develop security technology, we also have to keep in mind not only the development stage, but also the application stage. So also it should also be designed in a way that accountability is made sure at the application stage of security technology. This is, for example, related to reporting duties of security agencies to parliaments, to data protection authorities, to other independent accountability bodies, but also, and this is also very important in our perspective, also towards a broader public. So you see what we are discussing here in this presentation is very closely related to what Professor Eisert called the black box in the previous presentation, and we also saw related to the other research project that transparency is a major issue when we discuss complex security technology. We also include another aspect into our research, and this is the aspect of the individuals affected. So not only the police agencies and the single police officers or the people in private companies working with this kind of applications, but also those who are affected. So, for example, the customers or people who are in the focus of policing, they should understand what security agencies do. And we build very much upon a theory that has been developed in psychology in the past few decades, and that is now very frequently used also in policing research, that is called procedural justice theory. And in procedural justice theory, the main idea is that if people understand what agencies are doing, then they will be more easily be prepared to accept what is being done, even if it is related to some kind of encroachment upon fundamental rights, than something that is opaque and that they do not understand. And of course, then transparency in this perspective is a very important element of making sure that security technology is accepted. But of course, it has also to be designed in a way that it is acceptable. So this is not only a question of communication, but this is also a question of how the technology is being designed. You may have already heard that AI, until now, we have quite a number of uh, ethics papers that have been published by different bodies at European Union level, by data protection agencies. There's also an enquete committee in the German parliament, for example, working on AI. But now we are preparing for a next step because in April this year, the European Commission published a draft regulation on artificial intelligence. Some people already called the AI law. And in our perspective, this may become very important. Of course, this is only a draft for the moment, so this has still has to go through the lawmaking process. But at the end, if it becomes a binding regulation in the upcoming years, our guess would be that this may become similarly influential than the general data protection regulation. And if we look at the draft AI regulation, we see that transparency is one of the core elements of that draft. Also, already when it comes to the distinction that has been newly introduced by this draft regulation between high risk and low risk AI, for certain practices of high risk AI, it's even about prohibiting them, but then it's basically about enhanced transparency requirements for high risk AI. And we find that at a number of places in the draft regulation. And we also find what we think that this is really an option for this kind of research project that we are doing together, that is transparency by design. Because we as lawyers and social scientists, we are able to give hints on the requirements, but then of course we need the implementation of that into the technical solutions, because transparency by design, similarly to privacy by design, means that at the end, transparency does not have to depend upon the end user, but it has already to be implemented at the design stage of technology development. So therefore, I guess that transparency by design will become quite relevant in the fake ID research project. Yeah, as you may have seen, also some law enforcement agencies are involved in the fake ID project, and it's about how can they detect fake IDs in video streams. And this has two different aspects that we are covering by in the research project. The one aspect is the aspect of yeah, so the kind of crime that may be related to deepfake. So it can be, for example, fraud, but our perspective on this is much broader, and we already saw that in the previous presentations, that it is not only about fraud, but it can be also about, for example, manipulating political campaigns. And we already have seen that in the past, in recent electoral campaigns, that this can be something that may even influence the outcome of an election, and therefore this is highly important. And so the one question is this what kind of phenomena do we have? Are they legally relevant? From which threshold on is it a crime, etc. But then the second element that we are also dealing with in this project is the opposite perspective. So the police in a search, for example, in a big organized crime case, comes back with a huge amount of video data, and then they have to prove for the court trial that this is really real video footage, and that this is not fake. And so we also hope that we can do something in this research project for both aspects. If we look at the draft EU regulation, we have to keep in mind that on the one hand, most of the policing applications are classified high risk AI, so there will be higher thresholds, but there are also some limitations to transparency that are already foreseen in the draft regulation. So, for example, usually it would be prohibited to use real-time remote biometric identification, or AI systems communicating with human beings have to be made transparent in a specific way. But then we find we also exemptions for law enforcement. This is the usual way, so we know that from numerous different kinds of regulation. But in our perspective, what will be important then also for the lawmaking process is that this remains transparent and that also law enforcement agencies are accountable for what they are doing with these additional powers in these areas that the European Commission calls high-risk AI. And with this, I hand over to Jan Fährmann.
Yeah, hello from my side. A few words to the functions of transparency. Transparency is of great importance in constitutional law. Therefore, transparency must always be taken into account in the interpretations of laws. Transparency has a high priority in the primary and secondary European law. For example, the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights defines transparency as an essential element of the fundamental right of data protection. So the GDPR, so transparency has a important function too in the GDPR. And transparency is also seen as a requirement of a fair process by ensuring that all parties of the proceedings are aware of the circumstances and the facts of the proceeding. Equal or fair opportunities are created. Transparency also plays an important role in German law that should not be underestimated. But the discussion about the transparency of technology is not yet very far advanced in Germany, especially when it comes to the police law or the law enforcement. And transparent state action are in German constitutional law obligations that based on the principles of democracy and the rule of law. And the Bundesverfassungsgericht, the constitutional court in Germany, has therefore established high requirements for transparent data processing, individual legal protection, and government control. Yes, you. I think the slides are back. Currently, there's a lack of specific legislation for artificial intelligence. In many cases, the legislator or the legislators have not yet responded to potential problems and conflicts caused by artificial intelligence. Although it is already being used in some situation. And artificial intelligence has numerous impacts on different areas of law, as you can see here, maybe labor law or data protection, and also law enforcement. And it is expected that I think we expect that we will get some specific laws on AI in the next years. In any case, European regulations offer national legislators some room for own decisions. Okay, the next slide, please. Yes, let's talk a bit about the Fake ID project. It could be that applications that can detect deepfakes are defined as high risk. This is exactly what is described in the recitals of the draft regulation. It is to be assumed that negotiations will still take place and that there may be some changes will be made in the regulation. But however, the classification of the detection of deepfakes could remain the same, especially in law enforcement. Law enforcement often has serious consequences for the individuals concerned and their fundamental rights. So we can expect to have special requirements in the sector. And the crucial question will how transparency can be established in this area, when this must take place, and in contrast to other areas, criminal proceedings are often characterized by a lack of transparency and is therefore a particular challenge to create transparency in this area. Okay, as you can see, We have a lot of questions about transparency and the law of artificial intelligence. So yeah, in the project, we will look forward to finding solutions to these problems together with our partners and especially the technical partners. Thank you for your attention.